We're Compound Everything. We talk money, markets, and investing. And today we are talking about the cosmetic industry.
Yeah, this was interesting to me. So what got us on that?
Well, I took a position in Ulta, so I'll disclose that. And obviously, everything we say, nothing is advice or anything like that. So I'd already been looking into the cosmetic industry because I love cosmetics and skincare.
Yeah.
It's like a passion for me. And I guess what really got me into in going deeper past Ulta as a retail and distributor of cosmetics was that Estee Lauder is trading at significant lows.
Yeah. That's, I think, the impetus behind it was those two stocks making significant lows.
And then as we looked into it, we realized there's like an oligopoly.
Right.
3 major players in the industry. And we were like, oh, okay, like wait a minute here. Like, let's look into this. And there we kind of noticed that they're getting disrupted. So that...
Yeah. So that's kind of the impetus behind it. Also, one Warren Buffett or Berkshire Hathaway also took a small position in Ulta as well.
Yes.
Which made you very happy.
Yes. I guess because it got announced after I took it.
That's right. So let's talk a little bit about the cosmetics industry. What does that involve? What does that entail? So why don't you kind of go ahead with that a little bit.
So I guess I'll start by saying, like I said, there are a few big players. There's Estee Lauder, there's L'Oreal, there's Shiseido, and LVMH can be put in there because they actually do own quite a lot of different brands of cosmetics. And then they call it the beauty industry.
Yeah.
Because cosmetics is makeup.
Right.
Right? But a big part of the beauty industry is actually skincare.
Sure.
And so you have the makeup part of it, and then you have the skincare part of it. And then the whole beauty industry includes hair care and all of that. But we mainly wanted to focus on the cosmetic and the skincare portion of the beauty sector.
Yeah. So in that industry, you really have 2 key segments. You have your kind of premium makeups and cosmetics and skincare lines, and you've got your more drugstore brands and whatnot. So maybe the lower end brands and what have you. And so in those segments, there's key players in each, and each will kind of cater to a specific segment, or each will have brands that caters to a specific segment.
Yeah.
So why don't you give some examples of maybe higher end ones, because you'll know that better than I do.
Okay. So drugstore. So before, when I was a kid, a common drugstore brand would have been like CoverGirl.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I remember those ads for easy breezy beautiful CoverGirl or whatever, right?
And then Maybelline.
Yeah.
Right. Those are still drugstore brands.
Yeah.
If you go into I guess in the States it would be like a Walgreens. Here it's like Shoppers Drug
CVS,
Mart.
Walgreens.
Yeah. Okay. So prestigious brands would be like Estee Lauder, Clinique, Tom Ford, and you'll see those used typically. Again, when we were younger, you would see those in department stores. So if you wanted what they call like a premium brand or a more luxurious brand, you would have to go to the Bay and these are all Canadian stores or Eaton's way back in the day, right? But now you can get those in Sephora. And actually there are some premium brands now in Shoppers Drug Mart as well. Yeah. So those are the definite differences. Like if you see a brand and it's just like on row in a drugstore, that's like a low end brand.
Okay.
If you see a brand, even if in a drugstore, but it's got like its own display and it's much prettier, that's probably a more prestigious brand. And of course, how you can really tell is the price point.
Right. Well, that's the interesting thing in examining this industry. One of the things I found fascinating is it's been around since, for me, forever.
Well, women have been doing makeup for, like, even in the Bible with Esther.
Yeah.
She did, like, a year of beauty treatments, whatever that looked like.
Precisely. Yeah. So it's been around for a long, long time, beauty treatments for women. But I'm just thinking of the distribution channels. One of the things I found really interesting was studying a little bit about the distribution channels because, and I think, and I'll talk about this a little later, that's where there's major disruption either happening right now or going to happen. I think happening right now, honestly. But happening right now in that industry that is disrupting some of the major players. And what I mean by distribution channels is how do you get it? How do you buy it? So traditional distribution channels is when I was a kid, my parents used to drive me to department stores and invariably you'd walk through the makeup aisles and it didn't seem you could ever make it through the department store without going through the makeup aisle.
No, they're very strategically placed.
They're very strategically placed.
If you park, you would park so you could it's easier parking, right? At the mall. You go through the department store. Yeah. Right? But the makeup sections are always at the entrance of where you enter the mall.
Yeah. So you couldn't get through there without going.
Like that.
Yeah, you couldn't get through the department store without going through the makeup section. So you had the department stores. Then you got the drugstores, which carried significant amounts of makeup. And now you have more specialty retailers. And you mentioned you've got your Ulta Beauty, and you've got Sephora, who are kind of specialty cosmetics suppliers, sellers, distributors, whatever you want to call them. And now you have more direct to consumer as a possibility. And I think that's one of the places where the incumbent, big 3, 4, 5 players are probably going to get a little bit of disruption. We'll talk about that in a little bit.
Because the other thing that got me like really going down this rabbit trail, there were a lot. So I'm a lover of cosmetics and skincare, all of it, the whole thing. I love all of it. And so it's something I can understand.
Yeah.
Because I'm a consumer.
Yeah.
And so then there was this, so Ulta just has been getting punished. So there was that opportunity, or I perceived it as an opportunity. But then Estée Lauder is like at significant lows, still a high PE. And then you also have e.l.f., which has recently been falling. And I'm looking at e.l.f. and I'm thinking to myself, like, I use e.l.f. I love e.l.f. e.l.f. has a cult following, like 100%. And I'm thinking like, okay, they're also dropping, but like they're taking market share here from these big players.
Yeah, and you've been watching them for a while.
It just has really, all of this kind of accumulated into this deep dive as I'm watching the industry shift and change and morph from what it was when I was 13, 14, 15, really even from when I was 20, 30. Yeah.
Well, and you bring up Ulta, which is a very interesting study in and of itself as a retailer, specialty retailer of these beauty products and supplies and what have you. And go back to what I said before, the traditional distribution channel was often department stores. And so how Sephora and Ulta got in and got a foothold and were able to grow a large-scale business with huge margins, actually. I mean, Ulta for sure has huge returns on invested capital, high returns on equity, like very, very generous. And so how they managed to get that foothold in there from the traditional department stores, I'm not quite sure how that happened, but it obviously did. It may have something to do, I wonder, I heard a quote from somebody, I can't remember who it was or what the context was, but they said something to the effect of there was a specialty store that was starting to sell hardware supplies. And I can't remember what it was, let's say it was roofing materials. So roofing materials, let's use that as an example. There's a store in our city, it sells specialty roofing materials that you can't get at Home Depot. And people say, well, how did that happen? Like, how is not Home Depot just coming and squashing them like a bug? Well, I think that happens because Home Depot doesn't care if they sell roofing materials. They're going to sell certain limited amounts of roofing materials, eaves troughs, soffit fascia and all that kind of stuff. But they don't care if someone else has a bigger selection because, Joe Blow like me, who's the DIY guy, is just going to go to Home Depot anyway.
Yeah,
we're not going to go to the roofing store, right? And so I think that might have gotten a foothold. But if that happens too much, then you get these other specialty stores that pop up. And so think of the department stores. Well, maybe they don't care that, this little Ulta Beauty is starting out with, cosmetics and stuff like that. Well, we sell other things. We sell jackets. We sell shoes. It's not a huge threat to our business. But if more of these kind of things start popping up, then it could be. And then they've allowed, arguably they've allowed Ulta and Sephora to take a huge margin maker from them.
Now, this is purely anecdotal on my part. So department stores do sell makeup, but the brands sell it out of the department stores.
Okay, that makes sense.
So that's why when you walk through a department store, you will see like a stand. It's Clinique, MAC Cosmetics is a big stand that they'll, Biotherm is another one. Estée Lauder will have their own, Christian Dior. They'll all have their own stands and their own workers. Biotherm has its own stand within the department store. So I don't know if it's so much the department store sells the cosmetics or the cosmetics use the department stores to sell their product. So from a purely anecdotal statement, I'm going to say the way that Ulta and Sephora managed to capture the market instead of these brands going there is twofold. One, I hate department stores. My grandmother loved them. I think everyone my age hates department stores. If I want something, I want to go to that store for that thing. I want clothing, I go to Free People. I want makeup, I go to Sephora, right? I want groceries, I go to the grocery store. I don't want to go to one giant store. I want to go, and department stores in my mind are just like, that's like what my grandma did, right? Like I don't want to do that. I don't want to be my grandma.
Well, and go back to what I said about Home Depot. The selection is often limited.
Yeah.
in that respect.
Yeah, so that's one thing. And then the other thing is, like, obviously, these cosmetic companies and these skincare companies have a retailer that's just only selling their products. They're going to quickly put in, there's going to be no reason for them to not get their stuff in the department store still, because it's still there, and also into the Sephoras, into the Ultas, into the whatever.
Well, and from a consumer standpoint, you could see why someone like yourself as a consumer would favor going to Ulta or Sephora as opposed to going to a department store, even for yet another reason. That is that the workers there aren't pushing one brand. They're pushing what is going to look best on you. From that fragmented department store, boutique idea, that becomes problematic because they're all going to push their own products.
It was a big problem in the department store. There's two things. If you're on a budget, that doesn't work. Because if, let's say I go to the Estée Lauder stand, everything is $1 million. Right? Like everything. So I need my morning routine, I need my night routine, I need my moisturizers for under my makeup. This is just skincare. This doesn't even get into the makeup I'm wearing, right? So you're going to drop money like crazy because that is an expensive brand. And the department stores didn't generally carry the cheaper brands.
Right.
Okay, well, I'm willing to spend $200 on a night serum on Estee Lauder that has HA in it, and that's because I know for my skin that's important. But I kind of want a cheaper version of I kind of want a cheaper version of AHAs for my face. Well, then I have to figure out where else should I go. Right. Are there other, and I have to go to the next boutique. And then that person, of course, is going to talk up their product because they work for that company. And and I have to kind of go around to each stand, spend time, chit chat, takes forever. Now I go into Sephora, I say, look, I'm 45. These are my targeted problems. I'm willing to spend money on a night serum, but I'm hoping that my day creams can be a little cheaper. And they're going to go do, and they're going to find everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then also, so that's number one. Number two, with makeup, no one wants one line of makeup. That's not fun. It's like you want to screw around and find out. So you want to try, you don't want to be like tied down to one brand. But again, you go to a department store and it's like you have to spend all this time at MAC Cosmetics. And then you got to spend all this time at the next cosmetics stand. And it's like, but in Sephora, it's just like you said, one person, like, or 5 people working there. No one's pushing one brand. They can give
They just
you.
want to help you out.
Exactly.
Yeah. So that's the distribution channels. And that's, I think, evolved over time. And I think maybe let's talk a little bit about the total addressable market. How big is this market? Like why would anyone be interested in investing in this?
So on a global scale, from what I can find, it's going to be just over $600 billion in sales in 2024. CAGR for the beauty industry is said to grow at like 3.1-ish in the whole beauty industry. So it's a huge addressable market. That being said, it's growing because as people have more money, if you can feed your family and you have clothes on your back and you have a roof over your head, maybe now you're like, oh, I'm going to start worrying about my skin. You're not going to worry about that if you don't have the essentials. But as middle class grows in emerging markets and places like India and China, you're going to see more people want to do skincare, more people want to do cosmetics.
I was going to say, not to interrupt, but ironically, on that same vein, paradoxically, one of the things you find is, and I briefly looked into this, is that when the economy is bad, often lipstick sales increase.
Yeah, I know. They call it
the lipstick effect. So there may be something to call it economy resistant industry in a sense.
Yeah, like I said, when people have their essentials, they'll go to makeup. But I'm going to be honest, like I would cut out a meal a day if I could keep my makeup. If that was like the trade-off, I'd be like, right. Oh, I'll give up lunch so I can like keep or especially my skincare.
So from that standpoint, well, and you can even justify skincare as being something of health.
Oh, 100%.
Right. So cosmetics, in a sense, you could say, well, okay, that's a little bit more vain and whatnot. But, me taking care of my skin so I don't get, skin cancer. So I'm using, my foundations, which have SPF in them and, sunscreens and minerals, sunscreens and whatnot. So I'm taking care of my skin. I'm preventing wrinkles and aging. And so you can almost justify it to yourself as being a health.
Oh, sure. Look good, feel good.
Right, exactly. So you could justify it as being a health thing. So it's one reason not to curb that part of your spending.
Yeah. The more the global economy grows in GDP, the more skincare and cosmetics you're going to see.
Yeah.
On top of that, in countries where skincare and cosmetics are already like really woven into the fabric of society, men are growing in the skincare like crazy. Like the CAGR for men's growth of skincare is growing much faster than the overall industry as a whole.
I'm just going to call it out and say men don't want to age either. I know women don't want to age, but men really don't want to age either.
No one wants to age. That's why we have hair transplants for guys. Because like precisely. No one wants to age.
Right, exactly. And we've got dye for hair and stuff like that. So,
like,
you know, the take away the grays and all that kind of stuff. So from that standpoint,
you use skincare.
Yeah.
And like your colleagues use skincare, but this is going to be a guess, but I'm going to guess that like our dads didn't and their colleagues didn't. So it's becoming much more acceptable for men to take care of their skin. The total addressable market is in fact growing because we are becoming more vain. That is actually a thing. We are becoming more vain. I
100% agree with that.
Right? And that's for a lot of different reasons that we won't get into. So we have more money and we have more people because men are 50% of the population.
Yes, and I agree with you. I think it's getting more socially acceptable for men to do skincare routines and that kind of thing.
And skincare obviously is a bigger market for several reasons. The anti-aging aspect of it, like you said, everyone wants to find that fountain of youth. Mm-hmm. Number two, a lot of women who don't wear makeup and they just have no interest, it's not something that's important to them, they still care about their skin because skin is, like you said, it's part of your body. You have to look after it.
It's your largest organ.
Yeah. So just for fun, I'll read out some statistics. So I already said the global beauty industry is huge and growing at a 3.1% CAGR, projected. So the skincare market is approximately 44% of the entire beauty industry, okay? And the skincare market is projected or did grow at 6% growth in 2023.
So over and above what the
so the beauty industry is 3%, but the skincare in 2023 was 6% growth, okay? And then men's skincare is expected to grow at a 5% CAGR between 2023 and 2030, making it the fastest growing subsegment.
Oh, interesting.
Everything in the beauty industry as a whole. So you kind of got to take, you have like the beauty industry, then you have cosmetics, then you have skincare, then you have men's skincare, and kind of line all that up. And just for fun, for people listening, millennials on average spend $2,670 annually on skincare and beauty products.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
But I was like, okay, I was going through everything I buy, and I was like,
please don't tell me.
And it depends like what you all want to put into this, but I was like, if anything, that might even be a little low.
I'm dying.
Okay. So anyways, on that vein, let's talk about the big players. Let's talk about the disruption. Let's talk about why we're sitting here thinking like, do we invest in one of the previous oligopolies, or do we invest in the distributors, or do we, go after one of the indie brands like Elf? So why don't you give us some information?
So let's talk a little bit about market share. You really have probably about 5 or 6 large players that dominate the global beauty industry that I could find. There's L'Oreal, which is number 1, which has somewhere between 18 and 20% of the market as of 2023. And next comes Estée Lauder, and that one has 13 to 15%. And then you've got Coty, which has 6 to 8%.
And they don't have a lot of cosmetic brands.
No.
Like L'Oreal and Estée Lauder, their portfolios are huge. Like, I don't think there's a single person listening who wouldn't be familiar with at least a couple things that L'Oreal and Estée Lauder have in their portfolio. But Coty has like what, CoverGirl and Rimmel?
Yeah, and there's
both very
a few
low-end makeup and a few others, but they're more fragrances and whatnot. Yeah,
they have a larger, kind of more diversified.
Yeah, and we would never invest in Coty. It's a turnaround.
I looked into their numbers a little bit.
I
probably wouldn't put money in.
Again, not investing advice.
Not investing advice.
Okay, go on. So we have Estée Lauder, L'Oreal, Coty.
You got Shiseido, which has about 6 to 7% of the market, and then you have LVMH, which has 4 to 5%. In terms of the American marketplace, and in terms of the American sales, they have about a third.
Okay.
Which is crazy.
33% is a big portion of, that's a lot from a market that's so big. 33% is a substantial amount of sales that these indie companies are taking.
Oh, it's huge.
Do you have what percentage of sales they took 10 years ago?
I don't have those numbers per se, but they have been growing at a rate of about 15.7%, I think, annualized.
So a lot.
So it's huge.
That's crazy.
So that made me kind of go into a bit of, we'll call it a segue into indie brands and examine these indie brands. So what's going on?
And I'm a lover of indie brands.
Yeah, how are they able to capture this market share? Because, L'Oreal and Estée Lauder are household names. How did it come that these incumbent brands, these indie brands, have been able to take market share? So we'll talk a little bit about that. One of the things that you kind of have to understand, I think, to understand where these indie brands are gaining a foothold is trends in the cosmetics industry. So there's trends in the cosmetics industry now that are happening that weren't there necessarily before. And those are, one, increasing customization. And then that takes to the second point. There's a change in the distribution channels. So you've got, online sales, you've got direct-to-consumer sales, you've got online boutiques, you've got Amazon. And you've got Ulta and Sephora who are now distributing these makeups and whatnot. And so there's that, and we're going to talk a little bit about shelf space in a bit. There's also now a trend towards sustainability. So people are looking for more sustainable practices. As well, there's more a trend towards the marriage of skincare and beauty products together. And along that vein, there's also probably a generalized distrust of the incumbent brands because people are trying to choose more natural products, things that don't have parabens in them. And I think in a sense, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in a sense, a lot of ways, consumers are feeling they've been duped or lied to by some of the incumbents. So, L'Oreal and Estée Lauder and whatnot, there's a generalized distrust of
their packaging,
big makeup.
Yeah, big makeup's packaging has been very misleading. They use the words like natural, then you read the ingredients. And
they obfuscate.
And it's parabens in it, right? The other thing you didn't mention is that the indie brands are much more inclusive. Some of these bigger brands have been really bad at making sure people with darker skin tones can actually find like foundations and concealers that work for them. And I know that because I go there and I look, and it's like even the darkest one wouldn't even be close if you had a darker skin shade.
Yes.
And these indie brands have been much more inclusive in making sure that all women can wear all these brands.
Yes.
And that's been a huge movement.
And so the other thing that's come along too is, and this may be not a huge factor right now, but it probably will be in the future, although there's arguments against this, and that is augmented reality in terms of being able to
I've
try
never
on.
used that, but
Yeah, and being able to try on makeup shades and stuff like that. But as you brought to my attention, trying on a makeup shade and seeing if it looks good on you is one thing, but how does it feel when it's on you? Does it feel like grease?
Not
or does
all
it
makeup
feel
feels
like
the same.
Is it caked on or whatever? Does it feel like, what does it feel like when you're wearing it?
Yeah.
That part of things will still be, not experiential. So from that standpoint, these are kind of the industry trends that we're seeing. And so if we're going to pull some of these apart and examine them, and you can kind of see why these indie brands have started to gain a foothold. And so one of the main reasons that we just spoken of in terms of, how indie brands, and why don't you go through, you can list off a couple of the indie brands. Why don't you go through that, and
Okay.
we'll talk about a couple of them.
Okay, so sure, there's Huda Beauty.
Okay.
And there's Rare Beauty. And there's Makeup by Mario. And I have to think because there's like what people would think are indie brands aren't always indie brands. So people would think The Ordinary is an indie brand, but it's actually owned by Estée Lauder.
Sure.
People would think Fenty is an indie brand with Rihanna, but it's partnered with LVMH.
And that's what I thought, actually, which is funny.
Because you were like, no, it's not. I'm like, yeah. Right, or Kylie Cosmetics. I think, who owns them? Coty or...
I think Coty may have a partnership.
With Kylie, yeah, so it's not totally indie, even though it is, but Rare Beauty is definitely indie.
Yeah.
Makeup by Mario is definitely indie. I'm pretty sure Huda Beauty is definitely indie. Then there's like Summer Fridays, there's all sorts.
Yeah.
Like, man, there's just all sorts.
Yeah. And I guess you could say too, ones like what I was talking about this morning, Milk Makeup.
Yeah, I have it on my face right now.
Yeah. Which is a brand of a publicly traded company called Waldencast. And then you've got e.l.f., which is one of your favorites.
And then there's another one called Milani. I think that's how you pronounce it. I'm not sure. It's actually on my eyes right now. They're like an e.l.f. They're like a decent cosmetic company for a good price.
Yeah.
Although I will say some of their products are still very like CoverGirl-esque, so just like the quality's not there. Whereas e.l.f., like almost everything by e.l.f. is perfect.
So let's break down. I think you can't really argue with the fact that there's been significant inroads being made by some of these smaller players. And
yeah, if you were a denier of that, you cannot like deny that any longer.
No, so I think there's been significant inroads, especially with the big two. I mean, the big two are obviously L'Oreal and Estée Lauder. So those are the big two, and arguably Shiseido and whatnot. But so they captured the lion's share of the market. But what has caused that disruption? How has e.l.f. been able to gain a foothold? Like, how has Makeup by Mario been able to gain a foothold? How has Selena Gomez's brand, Rare Beauty, been able to gain a foothold? I honestly think, and after examining a lot of this, a lot of that has to do with influencers.
It's all influencers.
And social media.
It's all social media. For all the brands you just mentioned, it is 100% social media.
Yeah. So, and I think that these things are happening in concert and gradually eroding these, legacy brands. So, with respect to influencers, well, how does that work? What the heck does that mean? Well, I think in a sense that influencers, I know there's one lady that you watch. You watch her. She does her makeup in front of you. She uses all these different brands, and she gives them shout outs. Mm-hmm. And I know that you associate with that. So you see this lady, and she does her makeup, and she looks good when she does her makeup, right?
And the nice thing is too with influencers when you find good ones. So there's two in particular for makeup that I love, and the reason I love them is because they do their makeup without a filter. Mm-hmm. She's honest. And then the other girl that I follow, she's just a fun follow. She's really good at makeup, but she is so honest about what she doesn't like. And she's actually had people reach out to her, and she'll tell them like, okay, like I'll do this, but if I don't like it, I'm going to tell. So there's trust there, because I know if they say it's a good brand, they actually mean it's a good brand. And if they say it's not, I'm like, okay, yeah.
Yeah. So there's a trust built in with the influencers. Also, these influencers, they have a lot of followers, but they get back to you.
Oh, almost always.
So when you ask them a question, they're becoming like brand ambassadors, whether paid or not. But these influencers are becoming these brand ambassadors for, someone like Rare Beauty. Let's use that for an example. That one influencer that we discussed did a segment with Selena Gomez. Mm-hmm. So Selena Gomez isn't probably going to get back to you if you message her. But this influencer that she did one of her segments with sure does. Really, influencers have gained people's favor by several reasons, I think. One is they're personable and they're relatable and they get back to you. So there's that. And they've managed to create a community.
And they're entertaining.
Right.
Right? Like when you...
Not only are they entertaining, they're informative.
Yes.
They teach you something.
When I watch Erica, like you have to admit that Erica is entertaining. The ads, like back in the day, you think of a CoverGirl ad. Sure, it had like a little fun jingle and they used a supermodel, but it wasn't like entertaining. It was still an interruption to whatever else you were watching on television.
Right. So from that standpoint, influencers have in a sense democratized advertising for smaller players, right? So back in the day, the CoverGirl ads would be like in Vogue magazine and, teenage magazines and stuff like that for girls, but they were very non-focused. But now you have, someone like your follow Erica Taylor who will, either give a shout out to a makeup just because she likes it, and you trust her. And
she's always trying things. And here's the thing too with socials, she is a L'Oreal affiliate, but but she has to disclaim that. Yes. So now I know that every time she has L'Oreal, I'm a little less sure on if she's loving it or what. Like, I don't know what the contract says.
Right.
But whenever she does any brand outside of L'Oreal, I'm like, oh, yeah, like this is amazing, right? Yes. And then the other girl she's never had a makeup affiliate. So then it's like I can really trust her because she's not getting paid, because I always check ad or affiliate, because it does give you, and that's the issue with back in the day. You knew all these people were getting paid for it.
Of course. Yeah. And so it's the same now. So, I mean, that is the nice thing about social media in a sense, is there is a disclaimer and whatnot or a disclosure, I should say, not a disclaimer, but a disclosure when someone says, oh yeah, let's try this L'Oreal makeup. Oh, by the way, I'm being paid by L'Oreal.
Yeah, and if you find a good makeup influencer, they will still be honest. If you're an honest makeup influencer, you will sell a product. And these indie companies, they have done a really great job of getting their products into these influencers' hands.
So essentially, our argument is that social media has democratized advertising for smaller players. You don't need millions and millions of dollars to say to an influencer, can you maybe tout my product to your fan base, or can you try my product at the very least?
So I was going to just
say... And so you don't even need to say sell it, just try it.
I was just about to say, sometimes what these brands will do, so they're not even necessarily saying hey, can you do a video for me? They're just sending her, she'll open it on her feed. They're just sending her box of products. And then she gets to try them all for us and tell us what she thinks, what color shade she likes, which color shade she doesn't like.
Yeah. So, and that costs much, much less than a full-scale magazine ad, than a television ad, which is also nondescript. So when these influencers are reviewing products and whatnot for their fan base, these fan base people are already interested.
Yes, and for someone like Rachel, right? Let's say Makeup by Mario sends her a box of things. This hasn't happened, but let's just say it does. it costs them whatever it costs them to make that makeup and produce the makeup, plus the shipping to her house. That is what it costs.
Right.
But the amount of sales, if she tries the eyeshadow palette by Makeup by Mario, the amount of sales that they will make, because she is a beloved person in her little, her little micro-influencing niche is amazing.
Yeah.
And a lot of what is also crazy with these indie brands, a lot of these influencers actually go out to Sephora, to Ulta, and they pay for the product and still review it. So that's like a double win.
Yeah. Well, and if you think of it from an influencer standpoint, they want to maintain the eyeballs and they want to gain more eyeballs, more traction that way. So it's in their best interest to be honest and to be diverse as well, and try things that are off the beaten path.
Right. And then, of course, like a crowd drives a crowd. Someone tries Charlotte Tilbury's makeup mist, so the makeup stays on your face. Right? And everyone loves it. All of a sudden, it's a cult favorite. Well, now, if you're XYZ influencer and you're in makeup, you also got to try Charlotte Tilbury's thing. And then if someone else is like, oh, they liked it, now I like, because there is also a lot of competition between these influencers.
Yes. Yeah. So I think influencers have, no pun intended, influenced the industry significantly.
Oh, I'm influenced like every day.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a reason they call them influencers.
I'm not even going to deny that, yeah.
So on the basis that they have a community, they're trustworthy, and they can reach a targeted audience much better than legacy advertising ever did.
Yeah.
So that's part one. Part two is the distribution network has changed significantly. So if you think about it, the distribution network now no longer relies on shelf space. So in the past, as we discussed, department stores had to have a large presence. Now, if you're a small makeup company, can you afford to put a stand in every, Sears or Macy's? Can you afford to put a makeup stand in every Target? Well, maybe not.
I don't think anyone does. It would be very expensive.
Right. So, but if you can get an influencer to try your makeup and like it, from that standpoint, you can maybe generate some online sales. And that costs you much, much less, right? Furthermore, shelf space becomes less competitive. It becomes less of an edge. You know that Estée Lauder and L'Oreal had just a tight grip on that shelf space, and they're not going to relinquish that for anybody. Furthermore, they probably had deals with the stores in order to keep a certain percentage of shelf space.
Because the stores wanted their product.
The stores wanted their product.
Those products were the products
Precisely.
at the time.
And you don't want to make them mad by carrying a little, rinky-dink brand, which is probably not going to sell all that well. That becomes much, much less important with, things like Amazon sales. I would even argue with larger footprint stores like Ulta, they can carry more of that kind of stuff. So they need to fill up their stores. Shelf space becomes less of a competitive advantage. So I know you like to always say that certain companies have a bigness moat. And they did have a bigness moat, if you want to call it that, through distribution channels and networks and relationships with suppliers. But I think that's eroding quickly.
100%.
Previously, I would argue that one of the competitive advantages that big makeup had, just by being physically present, was that you could try it. You could use testers and things like that. So you could see how it feels and whatnot. But if an influencer says, "Oh, I give this product good reviews," I normally
good on the skin, lightweight, stays. I've worn it all day, hasn't pilled.
That's right. Oh, look, and they zoom in with the camera on their face, and see it's not cracking. You may be willing to drop $50 on this product, just sight unseen.
70, 80.
Say 70, 80, 100, whatever it is. So from that step, I know you've done that. So it removes a barrier.
Yeah.
So that is a barrier and a moat that these legacy brands had that they no longer have in terms of a distribution channel.
And the funny thing is, you talked about shelf space, and the interesting thing is, as these indie brands have grown, the funny thing is they actually have ended up with lots of shelf space.
They have.
You go into Sephora, they have a lot of shelf space, because now Sephora or Ulta or whatever is going to be like, wait a minute, like, well, we want a piece of this, like, we want a piece of the pie.
Yeah.
Right? So they're going to push over, their whatever other cosmetics, and they're going to bring in these indie cosmetics. And then, like, even in Shoppers Drug Mart, the e.l.f. section has gotten
expanding.
Bigger and bigger.
We've watched it. Yeah.
And bigger.
That's right. So you're seeing the competition happen. So I think there's at least two more points here as to why that moat has eroded for these large legacy brands. And that is innovation and agility. So a lot of these newer brands that are coming out, indie brands, as we've kind of already alluded to, they are targeting a specific niche in makeup. So for instance, you had mentioned color palettes were pretty much non-existent in some of the larger palettes and stuff like that from L'Oreal and Estée Lauder. People are looking more for new colors. They may be looking for other niche things like CBD infused products and things like that. Other people may be looking more for more naturally sourced or vegan options and whatnot. And again, go back to what we talked about before, and I think there's a generalized distrust of big makeup in a sense. And so these smaller players have been able to come in and say, look, this is what our products are. They're all natural. They're vegan. They're, not tested on animals and, this, that, and the other thing. And they've managed to carve themselves out a niche. And that's resonating with people more and more and more as time goes on. I think they've managed to take that little bit of the pie. So I think the larger brands are too big to adapt to that quickly. Whereas these smaller legacy brands become known for that. That's kind of their niche, and they run with it. Mm-hmm. And then they can expand their product line from there once they get successful.
It's the same problem that happened to Sears when Walmart came out. Walmart could pivot,
yes,
and Sears was just tied down by bureaucracy.
Exactly. So it's that bureaucratic, nightmare. So the other thing is, and tied to this, is these smaller these smaller indie brands are managing to take up larger and larger pieces of pie. So if these larger brands are letting, Elf come in and started to cater to the more drugstore brand. So let's use an example. You have Elf that comes in and they cater more toward the drugstore brands. And so Estee Lauder and L'Oreal go, okay, well, that's fine. Well, we're still about the premiumization products. We'll let them have that. We don't really care anyways. Well, they've lost a certain subset of the market. Why not fight for that? And so they're relinquishing a little bit of their control over that.
Also, I think it was hubris. Like success breeds hubris.
Success breeds hubris. That's powerful.
I think some of these indie brands came in and the big players were like, this has happened before. We've just bought them out.
Yes.
I mean, you think about a lot of what's in these portfolios of these big companies. They were at one time indie brands, and then the big companies just said, "Oh, we're going to buy you. Oh, we're going to buy you." And I think they kind of there's something they didn't realize. One was private equity.
Yes.
So these indie brands don't need a glorious exit through being bought out by a bigger company, right? Because they have private equity now. There's way easier ways to get capital now than there used to be. So that's number one.
Yeah. Also, I think the hurdles to starting a new makeup line are much smaller.
Yeah. So
there are actually labs out there who will cater to you, and like if you want to start a makeup brand and whatnot, I looked into it. None of these labs and whatnot are publicly traded, but there are labs and whatnot where you can take your idea to, and they'll help you formulate something.
Yeah. And so you have that. And then the other thing is they probably saw these indie brands and thought, they can't do what we do.
Yes.
Their color lines are never going to be as great, right? Their products never going to feel as nice on the skin, or people are just not going to want, like, there's going to be something about having our brand that's going to be important, right? And hubris just probably took over. And like, the truth is, I think I said this to you yesterday, one of the reasons I don't want to buy certain brands is because, like, my mom owned them.
Yes.
And like,
that was huge.
And our daughter is not going to want to own the brands that I buy because her mom owned them, like, as she gets older. And the funny thing is, like, brands I'm thinking about my mom she had when she was 20 or 30, which is younger than I am now. So she wasn't even old. Well, but it's just like, it's still your mom, right? It's just the way it is. It's like the circle of life. So I think success breeds hubris. And I think that Estee Lauder and L'Oreal didn't give these smaller companies enough credit and enough attention.
Yeah, to knock them off while they were ramping up.
Because they've been losing market share. You can see, they say they're not. They say it's China headwinds.
Right.
And maybe it is a little bit. But I can guarantee you that the reason why Estee Lauder's numbers are dropping a bit is because people's money is going to these indie brands.
Yeah. Brands have become much less important from the big brand perspective. And actually, they're becoming probably in a sense shunned. Mm-hmm. It would be part of my argument. So there's that part of things too. And as you alluded to, getting startup capital for a lot of these small up makeup brands is easier. To enter into the foray is much easier as well. And just as an aside, we did a little dive into, is this happening in chocolate brands and stuff like that? Because you got the same kind of idea happening with big chocolate.
Yeah, because you got
Mars, you got Hershey, Nestle, Ferrero. And you've got a few large chocolate makers, and we're kind of looking around. Is there any indie chocolate brands? The answer really is no, because it takes a lot of startup capital to get involved and whatnot. So I think that's the other thing, is the barrier to entry is getting low.
But we did see it in another industry, and it was the exact same playbook as makeup.
Yeah, and that is the wine, alcohol, and spirits industry.
Yes.
Interestingly enough. You've got a few big players there as well, Diageo, you've got Brown-Forman, and you got a few others. And now people are starting to favor indie brands in terms of craft beers,
And it's the
craft
same
spirits,
influencers,
influencers,
private equity markets. The only thing they
lower
don't
barrier
have,
to entry, all those things. And so they're starting to lose a little bit of market share.
So it's interesting just to see another industry have the exact same thing happen in almost the exact same way.
And the playbook is very similar.
Yeah, except for direct to consumer. But
right, that's maybe not so much of the thing there. So having said that, what are the challenges that some of these indie brands might face? Well, I think one is cost. I mean, it still does cost something to get things off the ground. Secondly is the regulation. There is some regulation in order to get cosmetics and skincare products out there. If you're going to tout that you have some sort of a benefit for skin, well, you kind of have to have some sort of, I don't know if you necessarily have to have evidence behind you, but you have to have something behind you, at least to say that, you know, people's faces aren't going to fall off when you try on their makeup and whatnot. And the one other thing is supply chain stability. So if you're a makeup, like a small brand that has, you know, a really niche product, but, you know, it depends on seasonality, that could come up being an issue if you can't get the ingredients. You know, who are they going to sell to? Are they going to sell to you or L'Oreal?
Right. Probably not such a big deal in makeup.
I don't think so.
You know what?
But
it's something to keep in mind.
It's a possibility.
I think another one that you didn't mention is just that how quick and fast these influencers move on to the next thing.
That's true.
Right? And so like you really got to watch. So something like e.l.f. and this is one of the things that I've been watching with e.l.f. because I do use it. I do love it. I see a definite market because CoverGirl really did suck. Mm-hmm. Whereas e.l.f. actually is really keeping up for the most part. I don't like their foundation, but like for the most part, most of their products are pretty good quality for the price point.
Yes.
But then the question is there going to be another company and, you know, all of a sudden it doesn't take much for these influencers to be like out with the old, in with the new, because they're also trying to make money, get eyeballs, got to keep it relevant, all of that. And so I think e.l.f. is sticky now. It has been around for a very long time now, for a new brand, but I'm still watching it because it's like it doesn't take much to do that, to take over in those.
Yeah, well, and I think brand doesn't matter until you find something you like.
Exactly.
You know, so from I think that standpoint, there probably is a certain amount of stickiness there.
But the younger generation is willing to change faster.
Sure, pace there. I agree with you, and I think from an influencer, if influencers actually do have the influence that we believe they might, that is valid, because as an influencer, it gets very boring to keep reviewing the same makeup over time. And you'll lose eyeballs.
Yeah, and also like you said, it's easier to start a makeup company.
Yes.
Right? More and more celebrities are realizing that, or that they can start one, or influencers themselves. I think Summer Fridays was actually started by influencers.
Yeah, I think you said that.
Yeah,
that's
so
interesting.
It's just, you have to, like, because the whole point of our discussion is if we're going to invest in beauty, do we want to be in the legacy brands? Do we want to be in the distributors? Do we want to be in an indie brand, which would be e.l.f., would be publicly traded? Like, if we're going to go into this market that's ever growing and hot, it's a hot market, right? And I would say it's recession proof to a point. Where is your capital best if everything else is equal?
Yeah.
If all these companies had the same valuation.
Yeah. After examining everything, I think the legacy brands don't have the moat that they once did. So I'm not sure they're the safe bet they once were. So paying a premium valuation for the safer bet probably doesn't make sense. Now, there would become a valuation with which they drop to, which would make sense, potentially. But having looked at them, I'm not sure that L'Oreal and Estee Lauder are necessarily there. Again, not investing advice. If I had to put my money somewhere now, so between the legacy brands versus the indie brands, so someone like e.l.f., who's growing rapidly and whatnot, e.l.f. would be interesting to me because I think there's room for them to grow, and I think there's definitely capability for them to take market share. And I think given the mechanics of the industry, I could see it happening. The place I would probably put my money right now, though, is retailers. Mm-hmm. I would probably put my money either in Ulta or LVMH or both.
Yeah.
Because
no matter what comes or goes, they're going to keep selling it.
Yeah, and they're going to have headwinds as well. And so their headwinds are mostly going to be either direct to consumer, so meaning that, what's to stop, Rare Beauty from selling all their products online. Sure, that could happen, but at the same time, you probably don't want to use all Rare Beauty stuff. So there's still probably going to be a role for the retailer.
100%.
From that standpoint. And there's going to be that face-to-face, for people who are maybe wanting that advice, from someone at Sephora or Ulta to help them do their makeup or whatnot. if that's a thing.
The
I
other
think it
thing
is.
too is if you buy a lot of different brands, sometimes it is more convenient to go to the store.
Yes.
Because I know this sounds silly, but when you have to go on the Rare Beauty site and then you have to go onto the Elf site and then you have to go onto the Charlotte Tilbury, it just gets tedious.
Yeah.
Right? But if I just go onto Sephora.com.
Yeah. Buy everything.
Right?
Yeah.
Or if I want the in-store experience, I just go into Sephora.
Let's face it, we're not hermits. People still want to go out.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm telling you, like I said to you, I could spend $1,000 in Sephora in under 3 minutes.
Yes, you did say that.
Like
Thankfully, you haven't done it yet.
I haven't done it, but easy. So
where would you put your money?
Okay, so to be honest, if I'm making the safe bet and I want some growth, because I think growth and value are tied at the hip.
I 100% agree with you.
So I would prefer it in Estee Lauder. I like their portfolio, and they're still. They still know what they're doing, but they are dropping a bit. So I think they're going to figure it out. I think that the management for Estee Lauder is going to figure it out.
Okay.
The issue is they are way too expensive for me still.
Yeah.
For me to allow them time to figure out.
Yes.
So if they were to...
The valuation doesn't make sense to you.
The valuation does not make sense. My money might be safe, quote unquote, is safe, right? But okay, I could also put it under my mattress and it would be like... So I just don't know if they're going to figure out fast enough. I don't think the valuation makes sense. I put my money in the market and take the risk to grow my money. Mm-hmm. That's the bottom line. I definitely am interested in LVMH. Yeah. I wouldn't feel uncomfortable putting my money in that company. I also love their portfolio and I love the brands that they use. Plus they own Sephora. Sephora is a big portion of their revenue. They don't disclose entirely, but they disclose like the retail segment and it's pretty decent. They also have their own brands.
House brands.
They have Sephora, which is a big part of the Sephora retail, and they have a lot of brands of makeup that you would recognize if I read them out. So LVMH definitely, like, I don't have a position, but I'm definitely thinking of taking one. And I actually am long Ulta, so my answer has to be a distributor because I own Ulta.
And their margins are excellent. You know,
Ulta
when you compare them to the margins of L'Oreal or Estee Lauder, their return on equity, return on invested capital are amazing.
Now, the thing with Ulta is that Mary Dillon is who took Ulta and made it what it was. Mary Dillon is now Foot Locker, and she's kind of trying to like revitalize Foot Locker. So the question is, can the new management keep their ROIC? Can the new management continue to invest the money to get that return on invested capital the way that Dillon did? I don't know, and that is what makes me a little nervous. I will not add to my Ulta position until it dropped even lower from where it is today, because I just think the management needs to prove itself. So the other thing is with Elf, I agree with you. If I wanted a growth stock, that would definitely be a good one. But I think value and growth are tied at the hip. Yeah. And I'm not going to risk my money when its valuation is so insane. I might lose out. Yeah. But I'm telling you, if Elf does a few things wrong, it's going to come crashing down. When that happens, depending on what they do wrong, I'm going to jump in.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with that. Yeah, Elf right now to me isn't yet a buy. Yeah. We might miss out on some upside, and that's okay, but at least our money's safe.
I'm going to come out and say we will miss out on some upside, most likely, but I'm okay with that because I know that these high flyers have zero room for mistakes.
That's right.
And
when
every
the price
company,
is perfection, then often companies and people being imperfect, that often happens.
Yeah, and every company will make a mistake.
That's right. Yeah. So I think that's been a good discussion. I'm not sure if you have anything more to add to today's chat, but
no, this was a really fun discussion for me because it's like right up my alley and I love makeup.
I learned a lot doing this, I think, about disruption and how just the world changing can change a very powerful moat. And I think that can apply not only to makeup, but as we mentioned, it can apply to other places where there are oligopolies.
And you can see it coming if you're watching.
Yes.
And it happened to newspapers.
Yes.
And people, like, I feel like even Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger were slow to see it happen. But if you just step back and watched, you can see it happen as generations change, as generations have different preferences. You can watch it happen. And if you watch it soon enough and you catch it, you can make money on it.
That's right. So I think that's all for our discussion today. If you could like and subscribe, that helps us out a lot. And leave your comments in the comment section. We'll try to get back to you. And we'll see you next week.